Hello and welcome to episode 43 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by MetsmerizedOnline.com. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and executive editor of MMO, Mike Mayer. And we're joined today by special guest, former MMO editor, now founder of Mets Legends and contributor over at Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation, Rob Piersall. Rob, it's great to see you again. Thanks a lot for coming on the show this week, man.
Sal, Mike, thank you so much for having me on, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. And obviously, we tweeted out earlier today as far as the show being on a bit of a hiatus. Obviously, you know, the MMO family lost its biggest champion on the last couple of weeks with Joe DeCaro, our founder. So obviously the show's kind of been on hold the last couple of weeks, and we wanted to have Rob on for the show. Obviously, Rob was an editor at MMO for years, worked a lot closely with Mike and Joe. And just, we wanted to start the show off just by kind of talking about Joe, sharing, memories of him starting the site, and just want to, give Joe his flowers here. Cause obviously it's been a rough couple weeks for the MMO community, especially Mike's worked, so closely with him for so long. So, we wanted to start the show off obviously by talking about Joe and kind of what he meant to the Mets online community and Metsmerized. So, Mike, obviously I want to start with you being the closest with Joe. We'll get to Rob, but I wanted to, have you start and get your perspective on everything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's been a tough couple of weeks since we found out that Joe passed away. As some folks will know, that Joe has been through health issues for seemingly a decade now, but he was just that guy that always fought through, and that was kind of what we thought. Like, oh, hey, Joe's sick again. It's not a big deal because he's going to fight through, because that's just who Joe was. He was a fighter. And unfortunately, he didn't this time. And yeah, it's been a really tough couple of weeks trying to just make sure the site's going, and make sure we do it in honoring Joe the best that we can. I think people kind of lose track of just how important Joe was to the Mets community, and the Mets blogging community. Just because he hasn't been healthy over the last couple of years, so he hasn't been as much involved. But this is a guy back in 2005 that started the blog on MySpace essentially, and then brought it over to a website. And he was doing this right around the time that Mets blog was coming along, Amazing Avenue. I mean, he was one of the godfathers of making Mets content online, and it was a huge community. It grew into a huge community mostly through him. So it's just, obviously it hit me pretty hard personally because I've become so close to Joe over the last decade, and he's done so much for me, not just as a person because he became a good friend of mine, but as a writer, as an editor, as a boss at MMO, as everything, as a leader at MMO. Joe made me who I am. I wouldn't be who I am today without Joe. And as you can see when we posted the news on Twitter, I'm certainly not the only person. There was just a huge showing of support for Joe, for writers my age, 20s, 30s, and 40s, that Joe took a chance on. And now they have careers in baseball, whether it's writing for sites like Sports Illustrated, like Rob does, and his own site that he created. Guys like Jacob Resnick that just get hired by the Mets. Joe hired him when he was 14. Mojo Hill, who's a beat writer at Oregon right now. Sam Leibowitz, who's announcing Double-A games right now. I mean, we could go on and on. There's younger ones. Clayton Collier, who's gone on to have a sports writing job as a beat writer. I mean, Joe took a chance on a lot of people, and he helped a lot of people further their careers and become better people too. There's a lot of people that didn't stay in baseball, but they have good jobs now because of how Joe helped mold them as people. Yeah, I mean, I could go on for a very long time about just how much Joe meant to me, and meant to the site, Mets community. He's definitely going to be missed. I know the one thing that I'm going to do the best that I can, and in talking with Joe's family, is to keep MMO going and going strong for his legacy. I mean, that would be the biggest thing that Joe would want to see, is to make sure that Metsmerized just kept going as it has been since 2005. And through all the context of with his family. I went down for the funeral, and I've been talking to someone in his family on a daily basis. They are fully committed to making sure that MMO continues as it has been, and just keeps getting stronger. That's what Joe would want, and I'm just hopeful that me and the rest of the folks can make Joe proud for what we continue to do at MMO.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, like you said, and Rob, I'm going to get to you, obviously. A quote that always kind of jumps out to me is from Jackie Robinson, right? It's life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. And just to piggyback on what you said, Mike, the outpouring of people online, just sharing stories of Joe as far as exactly what you're saying, giving them their first shot in writing in the media industry. And though some worked out, some went on to other things, but it sounded like, and I'm no different, same thing with me as far as dealing with Joe. It just like to help people and further people's careers and give them the best opportunity that they could. And I think, it's important to note, like you said, how many people over the years that he's had an impact on and affected, not only professionally, but personally. And obviously Rob's one of those people as well. That's why you're here, and obviously Rob, just want to get, so kind of your thoughts and your memories of Joe working at the site and things like that.
Yeah, obviously Joe was a really big reason why I have gotten to the point in my life that I have, not just in writing, but in general too. He took a chance on me when I was really young and I didn't have any writing samples to my name. I remember the first thing that I submitted to Mesmerized was a brief little thing that I had written for one of my classes. And I just wanted my stuff to be published. I read Mesmerized. I took a chance. I didn't really expect to get a response back from anyone, and Joe got back to me and gave me a chance to do game recaps. This was when I was 18 or 19, and so to see my name and have a byline for the first time was really incredible, and to write about a team that I've followed since I was 6 years old was really incredible too. And then I got to know Joe really well over the next close to a decade, and I got to advance through Mesmerized, and it kind of coincided with my journalism career when I was in college, and I got a lot of really great hands-on experience and would talk to Joe on the phone a lot. He sent me a lot of things in the mail over the years, sent me to a lot of games. I got to cover a game through Mesmerized at Citi Field, press box and everything, and just was a really incredible experience. And I'm really thankful for the moments that I had with Joe, because he really was a special person. And just to echo what Mike was saying, 20 years ago when blogging was in its infancy, Joe was really at the forefront, and it was kind of him and Mets Blog who were the ones that were the big names at that time. And he really grew a thing that's still relevant all these years later. And so many relationships that I've formed in the Mets community have come from Mesmerized. And you just see how much Mesmerized has its hands in the way that the Mets fan base is, the Mets, reporting is. Just there's people from all over different walks of life that have gotten their start at Mesmerized. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's just really nice. I mean, I talk to people from Mesmerized on a daily basis, and that's responsible. Joe's responsible for that. And that's just like a really beautiful thing that his legacy is going on still, even though he's not here anymore. And so I was obviously very heartbroken. My heart's still very heavy that Joe passed away. But all we could do is really honor his legacy by continuing to go on and do what we've been doing, and to continue writing and pumping out good content, and to spreading the love that he always did. So.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And, one thing that I've always noticed, being MMO the last 3+ years, Joe wasn't someone that just, you hired you, whatever, and you kind of did your thing. Joe seemed to read everybody's work and look after everybody's work, and always had like a nice thing to say, not, constructively, obviously, trying to help people get better, but never like a negative thing. Was always read your piece, whatever it was, and always found positive things to take from that and build you up. Particularly with this show, the last time I spoke to Joe was around Christmas time. He sent me a nice message and something for the holidays, as far as, just telling me how professional and happy he was with the show, and how, working with this every week with Mike. And it goes a long way. You know what I mean? Now I look back now, and that's kind of our last conversation. It was something that was really positive and nice, but he did that with everything. From watching this show to reading, to thousands and thousands of articles at this point of people coming through the site. He seemed to really enjoy seeing people grow and have an interest in the Mets and wanting to, share their opinion and things like that. And I think, it's really important. And like, you're talking about, he was kind of at the forefront in 2005, being right up there at Mets blog. It goes a long way. And I think, like I said, you could just tell from the outpouring of support, online the last couple of weeks, how much he meant to the Mets community and meant to so many aspiring people that want to work in this business.
And I think that, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and like you said, I think that was one of like his greatest qualities, Joe's, was even if there was something negative, he always tried to stay positive, and he did such a good job of like he's just reading content. I mean, he read so much content, and made sure that he reached out to writers and told them stuff. I know a lot of writers I talked to would have basically just given up after trying for a little bit if it hadn't been for the words of wisdom from Joe. I mean, that's essentially what he did for me. I mean, when I was on Twitter, I made some stupid little blog. It was like the main Mets blog.blogspot at blogsomething.com. And I was just writing about the minor leagues because I liked it. And I met Teddy Klein on Mets Twitter, and Teddy's like, "Hey, you gotta meet Joe. You gotta talk to Joe. I think you'd be a fit." My writing was awful. It was terrible. And for some reason, Joe decided to take a chance on me, even despite the bad writing. And he helped me improve, and he helped me work my way up. He did everything he could to make me a better writer, a better editor, a better person. I mean, that's just who Joe was. And I think that just shows how good of a person and good of a leader he was, that he wasn't like the Athletic plucking the best from the best. He wasn't taking and hiring from the best websites and the best newspapers in the country. He was taking high school kids, college kids, older folks that just didn't have any experience writing, or at least not in a professional manner, and he was making them into professional writers. And that takes a lot of skill, patience, and leadership to be able to do what he did. And he's one of a kind, really, in the Mets world, especially in this era of Mets content. He's just one of a kind, and I hope the outpouring was good, and I just hope we can kind of keep his legacy going so that people really understand what he did.
And I think that everyone had a very unique relationship with Joe in that he made everyone feel seen and noticed. And I know that, I've had my own personal conversations with him, as I'm sure you guys have, as so many people that I know have. And I think that was really amazing that he did that he took the time out to make everyone feel noticed and to feel important and just to connect with them. And like, if he wasn't just this, like one, I think maybe Mike said it, but that he wasn't just like, okay, he'd hire you and then that would be it. Like, he actually had a relationship with you, which was really great. And I think that, like, I was getting really emotional just reading the responses to the tweet that Metsmerize put out about Joe passing. Cause it was like, so-and-so would be like, "Oh my God, this is so terrible. Like, Joe was always so kind to me. He sent me gifts in the mail. He sent me Mets memorabilia." And then, you have someone who was like, "Joe and I used to talk all the time." And it's just like, I didn't realize quite how much it expanded beyond just the writers at Metsmerize. Like, he would engage with people kind of from all over Mets Twitter and Mets Facebook or MySpace back in the day. And so it was just like a really special person. And I know Mike and I had talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago, but Joe was such a good writer too. Like, that's like another amazing thing, is that people tend to forget, like, because he wasn't writing so much in recent years because he's been sick. Sure. But every once in a while, Joe in recent years would write a piece again, and you could just see how naturally it flowed and how conversational he was and how good his vocabulary was. And when I first started writing in Metsmerized, it was a normal thing. Joe wrote all the time. Right. And so he was such a good person because he wasn't fake. He was a really good writer, but he was humble about it, and he would spread his teaching outwards. And yeah, he was a man of who wore many different hats and had a lot of depth and was always very humble and kind, and never had an arrogance about him, even with Metsmerizes with all their successes over the years. So he's really going to be missed. You know, he was someone who was very important to me and to you guys and to everyone for many, many years.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Rob. And that's one of the two big things kind of talked about with folks is that he was a beat writer level writer. That's the skill set that he had, and he chose to use it as a Mets fan community. That's what he chose to use it for. And yeah, it gets lost in that because the last couple of years he just wasn't there health wise. But you go back, and I know we shared a couple of his articles in one of our chats, and we're just like, we had forgotten, even people that had worked with Joe, just how good he was of a writer and how he engaged the reader. And it was just amazing to kind of go through that. And the other thing we kind of touched on in that chat, because we're all in that chat together, is just how he brought people together. I mean, uh, I'm just a kid from Maine that happens to be a Mets fan, and I talk to folks from New York daily in a bunch of different chats. Um, and that's not just work related, that's friend related, that's baseball general chat related, that's politics, that's life in general. He brought so many people together that became really good friends and probably wouldn't have met otherwise. I mean, we might have replied to each other once in a while on Twitter or whatever, but Joe really brought people together because that's what he made at MMO was a community. So people felt comfortable working with everyone else that they were working with and felt like they could talk to them about stuff. And there's so many strong relationships like the one I have with Rob that were built simply because of Joe. I mean, he's the one that pushed those relationships closer and closer. And yeah, it's still tough to talk about just um, how much he's done for me and other folks like Rob. And I'm gonna miss him a lot. And I just want folks that are listening, reading MMO, to know that me and along with Joe's family, we're gonna do everything that we can to make sure that the site keeps going.
Yeah, and it will. You know, it will. You know, you guys are doing great things, and it's in good hands. You know, Mesmerize is in good hands. So
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, if there's one positive for anything, you know, you want to call Joe Yoda and Mike Luke Skywalker, anything like that, you know, the site is in great hands, and loss is a horrible thing. But you know, you gotta at least look at it as the memories were so good, and that's why you feel like that, right? If you didn't have that strong relationship, those bonds, those memories, it wouldn't hurt as much. It's hard to think about in the moment, but you know, Joe created something that hopefully is going to be here for a very long time. And you know, it's amazing thinking about even just how Mesmerize is run. It's all through Twitter, right? It's all through messaging, things of that nature. And at its core, you know, you would think how something like that could operate, but it does so well. And like you talk about the relationships that you form, Mike, like you're talking about being in Maine with people in New York and all over the country and things like that. It really is amazing. And it's a testament to Joe being, you know, a person that brought people together. And I think it's pretty awesome, you know, like Mike said, as far as like not trying to pluck from the athletic or these big outlets and things like that. Joe took a lot of pride in clearly in development. You know, let's think about the minor league level, right? You know, player development, that seemed to be something that Joe really, really took to heart and was proud of. And, you know, the results speak for themselves with the site and beyond that. And, you know, he's going to be really missed here. But I know as far as what the show is concerned and beyond, you know, we're going to do everything we can, like Mike said, to keep his legacy going and keep pumping out quality content for the Mets. And I don't know how you transition from this. We're going to try because there has been baseball that's been played. I'm sure Joe would not be too happy about what's happened the last couple of weeks. We do have to talk about it. And we're going to do that for him now, obviously. Mets played, if you're listening, tomorrow. Mets played a doubleheader today on Wednesday and got swept by the Tigers in both games. Max Scherzer pitched the second game. His return after the 10-game suspension did not look good. 6 earned runs, 8 hits, 3 and a third, I think. I don't even think he got to 2 outs in the 4th inning. Just in general, does not look like himself. Was 3 weeks off, essentially, was topping out at like 92 miles an hour. Just didn't look sharp. You'd hope the rest, maybe with the back that he had, the issues having beforehand, would help. I don't know. But right now, Mets 16-15. Justin Verlander pitching tomorrow, but I just kind of want to talk about these last couple games, which happened today against the Tigers, and just kind of what you're seeing. So, Rob, I'll start with you. Just the last couple games here.
Yeah, I mean, Scherzer's obviously the big concern, right? And you have to wonder if he has this lingering issue that's still plaguing him, or if Father Time is just coming for him finally. I mean, Max Scherzer is not a young player anymore, and some guys can pitch well into their later ages. And we even saw it with Max Scherzer last year, where he pitched well, but he dealt with injury last year too. Obviously, game one of the wild card series with the Padres, he got lit up, and you were thinking maybe it was just that oblique that he dealt with perhaps was not 100%, and that maybe he'd be 100% coming into spring training. But he has not looked good this year. They had the whole debacle with the sweat and the rosin in LA, which has obviously led to him having this time off, the suspension. But for him to come back today and not pitch well and to be topping out in the low 90s is really concerning, especially when you look at the rotation as a larger piece. And you could also talk about Joey Lucchesi, because he is someone who looked really good in his first start against the Giants and looked okay against the Nationals until the later frames. I think that he got into the sixth, but he didn't make it through. And then today he let up 3 home runs today, 3 home runs today. But so he's someone who you were maybe hoping could be this little lightning in a bottle type situation. And now it's just like, what kind of pitcher you really had with Joey Lucchesi. And you also have all these injuries in your rotation as well. So the rotation is kind of a dumpster fire right now, to say the least. And I'm not too worried yet because it's early in the season. That's like the good thing.
Sure.
And as we saw last year with the Phillies, they didn't get hot until kind of the end of the year. They were good, but they caught fire right in the playoffs, and they made it to the World Series. So if the Mets can stay competitive, you just don't know what could happen, especially if they add as the season goes on. But obviously, it's not ideal to get swept by one of the worst teams in baseball, the Detroit Tigers. So, yeah, I'm a little concerned. I think that the Mets have issues in the rotation, obviously. They have issues with their offense. There's some question marks in the bullpen, So some of these things are going to need to get ironed out, and I think they will over time, but it's just a matter of they need to stay afloat and they need to stay somewhat competitive until they can figure things out or add, because otherwise these games matter, maybe not as much as they do later in the season, but they matter as a whole. So I'm not going to freak out about one game, but you don't want to fall too far behind. So,
yeah, and I think some of the things concerning for me for Scherzer is, like you both talked about, his velocity was down. His fastball was down 0.5 mile per hour. His slider was down 1 mile per hour. And one of the things you'll obviously always look for with sticky stuff is spin rates. And there wasn't any big differences in his starts to begin the year for Scherzer, but today his spin rates were way down. 100 RPMs for a fastball and 137 RPMs on a slider. So there might be something there. Look, Scherzer had made starts prior to that game where other umpires didn't have an issue with the amount of sweat and rosin that he was using. Unfortunately, they did that game, and it happens to be the one umpire that's been involved in all 3 of the sticky substances issues. So, I think you have to be kind of concerned about Scherzer, because we're now going back to even the start before the wild card series where he wasn't very good either. So we're going about 7 starts in a row in the big leagues where he just hasn't been very good, and he's been giving up a lot of home runs. Going back to the playoff game, he's given up 10 home runs in 27 innings. And previous to that, in the regular season, he'd given up 13 in 145 innings. So that's certainly a sign of a couple of things. Diminished stuff. I mean, obviously, when you're working with diminished stuff and Max tries to attack hitters, you're going to give up more home runs. And the other issue I think I've seen with Max too is he doesn't have that command that he had early last year. And again, that's going to lead to more home runs too, because when your velocity is down and you're not getting that late movement, and you're just not hitting the spots like you were previously able to, you're going to give up home run balls. And yeah, I think you have to have some worries there. Um, and more so, like Rob said, the rotation's just been bad this year.
Mm-hmm.
5.31 ERA after today. And hopefully Verlander, as when people listen to this, Verlander will be getting ready to make his Mets debut in Detroit. And you just gotta really hope that he looks good tomorrow. That would take a lot of weight off a lot of folks' shoulders. I mean, Peterson, who looked very good in spring, struggled, got
Mm-hmm.
sent to AAA. McGill, I mean, McGill's actually been one of, I guess you can argue, one of the better starters. He's been okay, and that's what they needed. Lucchesi started off really good, and then he got knocked around today. Carrasco is going to have a rehab outing later this week. Hopefully that goes well. He didn't look good to start the year health wise or just velocity wise was way down. So you have to hope that when he comes back the velocity is there. So yeah, and we're still looking at a couple of months before Quintana even throws a baseball. So or throws a baseball in a game, I should say. So the rotation, I think the offense gets a lot of the talk because they have seemingly gone cold against some bad pitching too, like today with Michael Lorenzen, who hadn't pitched past the fifth inning and pitched into the seventh inning today. So there's certainly concerns there, but the Mets aren't going to win. They're not going to win anything. They're not going to get to the playoffs. They're not going to win anything in the playoffs unless this rotation picks it up. I mean, even Kodai Senga, I didn't mention because
Mm-hmm.
it feels like he hasn't pitched in weeks because the Mets are giving him extra rest. He's been okay, but even himself, he's had control issues where the walks have been way too high. The same with Buto in his couple of spot starts. He limited runs pretty well, but he had 10 walks in 2 starts. So that's just not what you want between the walks and the team that lead the National League starting pitchers doing giving up home runs. This is Verlander tomorrow is hopefully the guy that turns this around because that's what they need. This rotation's got to turn it around. They're not going to be a competitive team with an ERA in the fives.
And I think the concerning part is they don't really have anyone else
Yep.
in the minor leagues. I mean, you have Dylan Bundy, and I haven't really followed him too well, but I don't think he's really pitched very well. And beyond that, I don't even know what the next option would be. I don't know if there is one. You're kind of getting into Jared Eichhoff territory there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously the injuries have piled up. I don't think the Mets were expecting Jose Quintana to be out as long as he is going to be. And Carlos Carrasco is hurt, and David Peterson, as Mike mentioned, has really not looked good after a pretty strong year last year. But you don't have a Trevor Williams this year who can kind of absorb some innings. You don't really have that kind of guy, and then in the minors, you just don't really have the depth. So I think Verlander needs to step up, and he needs to be that stopper for their rotation as he's supposed to be. But like Scherzer, he's older too, so I think there's always that concern there as well. We don't know. He had such a great year last year, but I think that's kind of always in the back of the mind as well.
Well, I mean, all Dylan Bundy has done is given up 10 home runs in his first 3 AAA starts. So
Is that good?
yeah, he's not helping. I know Humberto Mejia was one of the names they mentioned previously, a guy they signed on a minor league deal this offseason. After that, I mean, 2 names that I was going to bring up in the minor league spot is in Double-A, 2 prospects, Mike Vassell and Dominic Hamill. I mean, that's kind of where we are at in the Mets depth chart when it comes to starting pitching. Both of those guys, Hamill pitched tonight, 5 innings of 1-run ball with 0 walks and 8 Ks. His second straight good outing. His ERA is 2.18 in Double-A. And Mike Vassell's in Double-A too, and his ERA is a little misleading at 4.50, but he's got 27 Ks and only 2 walks in 16 innings. So I think if it was me and we keep getting farther into the depth chart, Mike Vassell is the guy for me that I see coming next. And I kind of tweeted it out a couple of times earlier in the spring that he's definitely the type of guy that likely pitches in the big leagues this year at some point, whether they want him to kind of be a long man out of the pen to get some innings that way, or they do need a spot start here and there. I think Mike Vassell's that guy. But yeah, I mean, once you're talking Humberto Mejia, Dylan Bundy, Dominic Hamill, Mike Vassell, we're talking about the 8th, 9th, 10th starters. So um, you don't want to get that deep. The Mets are already pretty deep into their depth early in the season. Like Rob joked around, you get into the portion of the season and depth-wise where you have to sign Jared Eichhoff to make spot starts. So hopefully Verlander comes back strong, Carrasco comes back strong. That'll give the Mets rotation certainly a good boost if those guys are ready to pitch.
Yeah, I mean, Verlander has to be not even just a stopper at this point. He's got to bring stability to the rotation, especially at the top. I don't expect him to pitch too long into the game tomorrow. It's his first start of the year. I would assume it's around the 80 pitch mark. I don't know, but that's what I would think. That it seems as though the Mets, after what happened last year, kind of, losing steam at the end the way they did and kind of just running on fumes into the playoffs. I think their plan seems to be keeping these guys as healthy as they can to be as fresh as they can come August and September, which I understand. But got to win these games. Like Rob, you said before, you still have to win these games in April. And especially now they're in a stretch the next couple of weeks where they're playing teams that on paper, they are far better than. You got to win these games.
You got to beat the Tigers. You got to beat who they're playing, the Reds after this.
Right.
You got to beat the Reds. You got to beat up on the bad teams because when you do play the better teams, you can afford to lose one or two there.
Right.
Not that you want to, but yeah, it's bad when you're losing really bad with the payroll the Mets have to a team like the Tigers, who
sure.
I think when I was listening to the radio today, Miguel Cabrera and Javi Baez are making like $57 million of the $122 million that is the Tigers payroll. And Miguel Cabrera is taking like 53 at bats this year.
Right.
So it's bad. I mean, they're a bad team.
And again, losing 2 out of 3 of the Nationals at home,
yeah,
you don't, it's the old saying, right. You don't win the pennant in April, but you can lose it. And again, with the expanded playoffs, I don't agree with that as much now. You kind of just have to get in. And if you're hot, like you said, with the Phillies, you can make a run. But in division wise now, when you're only playing teams 13 times a year, you got to beat up on the bottom feeders, whether that's in division or now the next couple of weeks. Like you can't play down to level these bad teams, because after a while, if you can continue to do that, right, you're going to be what your record is at some point. So if you keep playing down to these bad teams and you're not doing anything, you're going to be that club. And hopefully it's not the case against April. They're 16-15 with what we're talking about. The starting pitching has been total shreds. The offense really hasn't clicked at all outside of really Alonso and Nimmo, who have gotten a little cold at recently or whatever. But, it's a tough thing because, again, I go back to that. You got to get hot, but you got to still win these games you're supposed to win. And real quick, talking about how the pitching's in disarray and the offense has not really gotten a lot going. There is one player that can fix both of those. I'm not going to say names because I don't really want to give up the whole farm when he's going to be a free agent at the end of the year. But if this keeps happening and you get closer and closer to that deadline, that name's going to pop up. That man is going to pop up. Fans are going to want him because he can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I understand. It's still got a couple of months from all that. But I wonder, as desperation mode here keeps getting going as they get close to the deadline, if they really want to try and make a splash like that. But in general, they need arms, man. They need arms really, really, really bad. We'll see what they do. Between now and I guess August, whatever, waiver claims, things of that nature. But, I don't love rolling with Carlos Carrasco in the back end of that rotation for a few months. I don't, wasn't really talk about another guy. Velocity's down. He didn't really look like he was having competitive at bats against guys. It's this team from spring training went from, some decent depth in the starting rotation to it's really, really, really thin now. And, Scherzer, I think, will get right. I think as maybe it warms up and he starts getting to a groove here, maybe the pitch clock has something to do with it too. I don't know if that has anything. I know he's complained a little bit about it, but hopefully Verlander starts tomorrow. Stability in the rotation. They need it, and they need him. Whether he pitches 5-6 innings, it's got to be good. You know what I mean? So to, like, Mike had said, to give kind of everyone a sigh of relief that the anchor is here, so to speak. But I want to transition as far as from players not doing well to one player that is doing well, is Brett Baty. We've said his name no less than 10,000 times on the show the last year. We wanted him to break camp with the big league club. It didn't happen. Forced the Mets' hand while he was in AAA. And clearly this is a guy now that is the Mets' everyday third baseman of now and the future. Whether it's defensively, I think he's made a decent jump. And Mike even talked about how he's a league average defender at this point. I think we see that. And the bat just plays. He has good at-bats, hits the ball really, really hard. So I just want to, Rob, we'll start with you. Get your impressions now of Baty's second stint up here with the big league club, and hopefully one that'll now last for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple, what it boils down to is that the kid's a stud. He is. And I gotta be honest. I mean, when they first made the pick and when he was early on in the minors, I didn't really know how I felt about Baty. I think maybe I was also a little bit salty that they traded Jared Kelenic,
Sure.
and I was kind of unfairly comparing the two. Not that they're similar players, but
Right.
they were just early draft picks by the Mets. And I just think that the way Baty is developed, and you mentioned his high exit velo and everything like that, he hits the ball really hard. And he's so young too, which is the exciting part about it, is that I think that he's only going to continue to get better and better. And I think it's really exciting to see a third baseman that's homegrown and can hit for power that the Mets haven't really had since David Wright. Obviously, I don't know the advanced analytics on David Wright, but I always regard him as a really good defensive third baseman. And whether Baty gets there or not, I don't think it really matters. As long as his bat is there to carry him, I think that'll be okay. But it's been really great to see him, and I am glad that the Mets didn't wait any much longer than they did with Baty. I also wanted him to start the season with the big club. Especially it was kind of self-fulfilling when Eduardo Escobar really wasn't doing well, because not that I wanted Eduardo Escobar to struggle, but also it's kind of reinforcing the fact that Baty needs to be up there. And Escobar has been a really great sport about it, and
Sure.
He's taking pictures with Baty and everything like that. He's a good veteran, but Baty's the future, and I think that it was a little bit wasted to have Escobar start because he's not the future, and that's just simple. But yeah, Baty's really awesome, and it's really just great to see so many homegrown guys on the Mets that are staples to the team now. Like you mentioned, your Alonsos and your Nimos, Jeff McNeil. Baty's just another guy in that kind of realm. So, and I think that he's going to have a really, really good season too. So it's going to be really exciting to watch him. And, I think that if the rest of the Mets offense could pick it up, whether they add someone, I mean, they're going to have to add someone, but he's going to be a big piece of the equation regardless. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, since Baty's come up, I mean, he struggled for a couple of games, maybe, but then he's been hitting right along. I mean, he's been on base 11 straight games before the second part of the doubleheader. He's hitting the ball hard. He's playing good defense. I know before the games today, they had the field covered so that they couldn't get on the field, but he was still taking some ground balls with Joey Cora off to the side. I mean, that's just kind of goes back to spring training and what I talked about is he's every opportunity he could, he was out there working on his defense because he knew that. I mean, he's a smart player. He knew that was his weak spot. He knew that's where he needed to improve, so that's what he worked the hardest on, and he has. He's looked perfectly fine at third base in the major leagues. I mean, there's going to be plays that he doesn't make. He's still a rookie. He's still a young player. There's going to be plays that he goofs up, but ultimately, I think he's going to be an average defender, which I've said all along, and that plays just fine when you're talking about a guy that hits like he does. And we've already seen it in the big leagues too. Is one thing that young players struggle with, especially as a left-handed hitter, sometimes is hitting against lefties. And he hit his first home run against a lefty, and all of his at-bats against lefties have been strong, whether, I mean, making that lefty throw a bunch of pitches or working a walk against a lefty. I mean, that's something that's an advancement for a hitter at that age. So, yeah, I think I think basically Beatty's just shown that he's where he belongs. He's a major leaguer, and like we've said, he's the Mets' future at third base. And I think it's good. I mean, obviously, I think we all agree that it took too long for it to happen, but it's a good thing that he's there now for a Mets offense that needs him. They need a guy that's gonna hit around 300, get on base at a good clip, and hit for some power. That's the type of guy that he's gonna be. I know he's hitting a lot of seventh and eighth right now, but once he really gets into his groove, I think this is a guy that's capable of certainly hitting in the middle of the order. So that's good. I mean, that's what the Mets need, and even Francisco Alvarez has looked better recently too with the bat. Look, he's a guy that when the Mets called him up, they essentially was like, well, he's going to play some. And Buck had the thing about him being like a college QB on an NFL team where he kind of needed to learn the ropes. I mean, this is a guy that since he started playing baseball has just been the guy. He's been the dude that just plays every day, and it's pretty tough to go from doing that to being a guy that just plays some. And that's what he was for the first couple of weeks when he was in the big leagues. Now that he's gotten a little better consistent playing time, he's looked much better at the plate. Even as outs, he's still, I mean, in the second game of the doubleheader today, he had the hardest hit ball in the game. Granted, it was an out, but it just shows you the type of skill set that he has. Quick hands at the plate, great swing. I think maybe the most impressive thing so far from him has been his pitch framing. I mean, he's been an elite pitch framer at the big leagues so far. And that's something he definitely improved on last year. If you talk to Max Scherzer, who pitched to him, Jacob deGrom, other pitchers, he was a very good framer last year, and that kind of gets thrown to the wayside in the minor leagues. That's a tough thing to evaluate from a fan standpoint or from a non-scout standpoint. It's pretty tough for folks to get a good look at framing. I mean, he still certainly has some work to do on blocking and behind the plate. He certainly has some work to do with his accuracy at second base, throwing out base runners. I think that's certainly a weakness for him. But when it comes to pitch framing, he's looked really good. Calling games, he's looked super comfortable doing that. So I think, look, the Mets, and we've said this a couple times on the podcast, the Mets' strength this year, the Mets' ability to win this year and go into the playoffs is going to rely a lot on some younger players, and they need Baty and Alvarez to come through to kind of take some of that burden off Lindor, McNeil, Alonso, and Nimmo. When they struggle, you need other bats in the lineup. And it's just a much deeper team when you have Baty over Escobar and Alvarez over Neto in the lineup. It's just, it gives so much more length and so much, it's such a tougher lineup for an opposing pitcher to go through. I mean, there was points at this year, I'm sure opposing pitchers were like, well, yeah, that 1 through 5 is really tough, but once I get through there, the bottom of the lineup is where I can really kind of maneuver and get quickly through some batters, keep my pitch count down, and not worry about giving up any home runs. And now the Mets lineup is pretty good 1 through 9. I mean, there's still guys like Starling Marte is the one that just continues to seem to struggle. And you have to wonder, I think that fly ball today that he didn't get to, that had a 90% catch probability, really makes you wonder if he's 100% out there. Because this is a guy, Marte, who used to be a very strong defender, and that's a ball he almost always catches. And we've never really seen him struggle like this offensively as a Met for this long of a period. So for that to coincide with kind of him not making that play today, I just wonder if coming off that double groin surgery, if he's still just having some lingering effects where he's just not 100% all the time, because this is a guy that was great for the Mets last year, and he was so good that when he got injured last year, you saw how much his offense meant to that lineup. And right now, hitting him too, I think Buck needs to make a change there if this keeps going. You just can't keep Marte in that 2 hole if he's going to continue to be an OPS around 7 guy, 700. They've got other options. He batted McNeil third in the second game. Like I said, Beatty's hitting well. You can move him up. I mean, even Vogelback, he's a high on base guy, so
Mhm.
you could move him up if you wanted to too. But um, yeah, it's tough to watch Marte right now. Hopefully, I mean, you don't want it to be an injury, but if it is a lingering injury, hopefully some rest they'll be able to get him right back to where he needs to be.
Yeah, I just as far as what you're saying with Marte, he's a few balls this year that seem very catchable and something that was right in his range that he either misplayed or dropped. It's very strange to see. I agree. Maybe he's not fully healthy, and yeah, if he continues to struggle at the top of the lineup, you're gonna have to shake something up. As far as Alvarez goes, I was going to say the same thing as far as, you got to give him credit now. He looks much more comfortable at the plate, and I think that does go with more playing time. And at this point, no offense to Tomas Nido, but, Alvarez should be playing most days. You're getting absolutely nothing out of Nido offensively, so you don't want another automatic out in the catcher position. The Mets have had that the last couple of years, James McCann experiment, so you don't really want more of that. But, I think he's looked good defensively. I like his pitch frame. Like you said, I think his blocking balls looks good. He hasn't thrown a lot of runners out yet. I think in general, that's just a baseball thing now. Guys are running rampant with the new rules and stuff, so you take that with a grain of salt. I don't know who Jacob deGrom is. You mentioned some guy that he threw to. Never heard of him. But Max Scherzer, that's good. I'm glad that he likes throwing to him. That's great. And yeah, it's a team that's clearly not clicking on all cylinders on any aspect, and it's strange to see because of this quick starts not only last year but the year before that they had. So hopefully this is a case of they'll get hot in the second half. They kind of scrounge around here and kind of hit their stride come June or July or something. Because they're clearly not clicking on all cylinders. But there's some bright spots to be had, like you said, as far as the younger guys in the lineup. And when they made the choice not to sign a Carlos Correa, it just seemed inevitable that you would have to rely more on some of these younger guys. And you think Mark Vientos at some point, who Mike's going to talk about and soon, will be up and contributing again for the Mets. So it'll be interesting to see how the youth here can continue to provide a little shot in the arm for this team. But I guess that's a good segue talking about the minor leagues, and that's how we want to end things. So Mike, if you want to update us a little bit on who's been doing well down in the Mets minor leagues and their system there, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I mean, you just name dropped Vientos. He's got 9 home runs and 95 at bats. That would be a good pace, folks. I'm not great at math, but that's pretty good. Um, he's been great all year, not just power wise, but the more impressive thing from Vientos, because we know that he has that type of power, is that his strikeouts are down. He's striking out around 22%, which is very low for a power hitter. And he's walking a little bit more this year, around 11, 12%. So he gives the Mets options if they decide to make a move. Tommy Pham, Mark Canha, they both kind of struggled this year, despite both of them homering today. They still haven't looked great offensively. And one of the biggest weak spots for the Mets has been them against left-handed pitching this year. Well, not just this year, seemingly every year the Mets struggle against left-handed pitching, but Vientos could be that type of answer because Vogelback's obviously not going to start as the DH against lefties. So if you call it Vientos, you have that option there. You have a big power bat off the bench if you call it Vientos. It'll certainly be interesting to see. I know the Mets aren't going to give up on like a Canha. They might reduce his playing time, but Pham is the type of guy you have on a cheap 1 year deal. If he continued to struggle 2 months, 3 months into the season, we might think about moving on from him. So if they're able to do that, Vientos is there. Ronnie Mauricio, he's still hitting for power. Had a couple of doubles the other day. Yeah, the bad news is he's walked once in the last 18 games. Look, Mauricio's power is very exciting and is very enticing. That said, he's not major league ready, which is fine. I mean, the Mets don't need to rush him. There's no reason to rush him. He's playing second base now. He's played a majority of the last 2 weeks at second base. He's looked fine there. Um, that's good. That gives the Mets options if something does happen. If there's an injury, then you have more. Mauricio has more experience at second base, and he's still hitting for a lot of power. But yeah, it's given the walks. I mean, his walk percentage is down to 4.2, I think, at this point, and that's just you can't have a guy at the major league level that's going to do that. It's tough to have success at the major league level because the pitchers aren't going to throw any strikes. It doesn't make any sense for them to throw strikes to a guy like that. So they're going to avoid throwing him anything good. And then go down to Double A. Vientos, Hamill and Bassel, who I already mentioned. Both of those guys are pitching well. Could see them bumped up to Triple A soon if they keep pitching well, because like we said, the Mets starting pitching depth is pretty thin. So it's good to see both of those guys from the same draft pitching really well. And one guy I don't know if we've even mentioned on the show ever is Matt Rudick, an outfielder who's in Double A right now. He's a shorter guy. He's actually shorter than I am, and I'm not very tall. But coming into today, his on base percentage was just under 500. He's walking a ton. He's showing a little bit of power. Outfielder, as we've mentioned on the show, the Mets outfield depth at the upper levels is basically non-existent. Carlos Cortez, Khalil Lee, Lorenzo Cedrola, Jalen Davis, those are the names of guys that they have playing outfield in AAA. So for Matt Rudick to be playing as well as he is, that's certainly a good sign for the Mets. I'm still not sure he's more than fourth, fifth outfielder type, but it's good to see that they have someone in the outfield that's playing well at Double A. And down in Brooklyn, I posted a video of him today, Tyler Stewart, a right-handed pitcher that's been looking really good. Last night he had 9 strikeouts in 5 innings, including one of Jackson Holliday, the number 1 overall pick from last year. He made him look ridiculous. It was a pitching ninja sword for sure. He tied him right up and then came back with a fastball and struck him out. He's looked great this year, an ERA around 2 to start the year. And look, it's been a pretty good draft from that pitching class, so it's nice to see this. Stewart 6'9", he throws in the mid-90s. He's got a curveball slider. It's good to see him pitching well, like we're talking about with the Mets pitching depth. Maybe he gets the bump up to Double A. One of the 2 guys I already mentioned get the bump up to Triple A. And then St. Lucie, I don't really think we need to talk too much about the St. Lucie Mets. They are now 5-18 coming off their championship season last year. They're just struggling. They have a really young rotation, and they have a lot of promise in that rotation, but it's just not coming to fruition yet. A lot of walks, a lot of home runs. It just hasn't been a good year for them. The positive thing is the other day that they got their championship rings. So that was a good uplifting thing for them after a rough start to the season. Jet Williams, one of their first rounders from last year, has played pretty well. He's got an OPS in the high 700s. I think we mentioned on the show that he's even playing some center field now too. So you're getting some versatility out of him. So yeah, I mean that pretty much puts a wrap on the minor league stuff. It's like we're talking about Baty and Alvarez being key roles. I mean, we could see Vientos playing a key role at some point soon too. He's been at AAA for a while now, so there's nothing left for him to prove at AAA. It's just a matter of the Mets calling him up and thinking they have enough at bats for him to be productive.
Absolutely. Rob, is there anybody in the Mets minor leagues? Anything that you're excited about that you're watching for this season down there?
I think Jet Williams is a guy that I really like.
Mm-hmm.
I got to talk to him right after he was drafted last year.
Nice.
That was really cool. He was super nice, super humble. So he's someone that I'm definitely going to be interested in following. And as Mike mentioned too, Mike Vassal's a guy that kind of burst onto the scene last year and was really good for them. Unfortunately, a lot of the guys that I liked, including Nick Zwack, got traded last year by the Mets. So I'm going to have to find a new couple players to kind of latch on to. But Tyler Stewart's dad follows me on Twitter, so it's cool to kind of live vicariously through him as well. But yeah, I think those those younger guys from last year's draft class. I mean, Kevin Parada is a guy that I'm interested to see what they do with him. If he's going to stick a catcher, if they're going to move him out of that position. I guess we'll see. I know that I think that they're maybe considering maybe making him an outfielder. I don't know if that's something you can confirm or not, Mike. But I don't know if he's going to be a guy that's going to stick a catcher. So, but yeah, Jet Williams is definitely a guy that I really like. He's the guy that I'm kind of most interested in following this year. And that makes sense. He was a first round pick. So
Jet the Met. It's a great name. You can't be bad with the name like that. You got to be fast. You got to be good. So hopefully it all works out. But yeah, no, I think that kind of wraps up the show for us this week. Rob, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your stories about Joe with us, talking Mets here. Obviously, we can't wait to have you back out throughout the season here. Everyone check out Mets Legends if you haven't. Rob puts out great content there. We really enjoy it. But until then, guys, we'll catch you next week, and hopefully the Mets will start winning again between now and then. So until then, let's go Mets.
Thank you, guys.